Good evening, and welcome back. Settle into a comfortable place, take a slow, steady breath, and let the noise of the day drift quietly into the distance. Breathe in and breathe out. Feel your shoulders grow lighter, your thoughts becoming still, and allow your attention to rest on the sound of this story. Tonight, we travel nearly 2,000 years into the past, to a city that believed itself eternal, to a republic standing on the edge of becoming an empire, and to a single man whose ambition, brilliance, and destiny would forever change the course of history. Rome had seen victorious generals before, but never one quite like Julius Caesar. He was born into an ancient patrician family whose noble name carried prestige, yet little wealth. As a young man, he witnessed political violence tear apart the Republic. Friends became enemies overnight. Powerful men disappeared through exile or execution. Rome taught Caesar an unforgettable lesson before he ever commanded a soldier. Power did not belong to those who deserved it. It belonged to those strong enough to seize it and wise enough to keep it. Years later, he marched into Gaul with legions that would become legendary. Campaign after campaign ended in Roman victory. Rivers were crossed that no commander dared challenge. Fortresses thought impossible to capture fell one after another. His soldiers adored him because he shared their hardships. He marched beside them through snow, rain, and hunger. He rewarded courage generously and remembered loyalty even longer than victory. Every triumph carried his name farther across the Republic. Every dispatch arriving in Rome described another conquest, another enemy defeated, another territory claimed for Roman glory. Citizens celebrated him as their greatest living general. Senators applauded publicly, but behind closed doors many exchanged uneasy glances. Military victories created something more dangerous than admiration. They created influence. Influence became loyalty. Loyalty became personal devotion. Thousands of battle-hardened veterans obeyed Caesar before they obeyed the Senate itself. That frightened Rome's political elite. The Republic had been built upon a careful balance. No single citizen was supposed to become greater than the state. Yet with every campaign, Caesar seemed to rise higher above the institutions that had governed Rome for centuries. Then came the moment that shattered the old order. The Senate demanded that Caesar surrender his command before returning to Italy. Another general might have obeyed, accepting retirement and trusting the political system to protect him. Caesar understood the danger. Without his army, his enemies could prosecute him, destroy his reputation, or even arrange his death through legal means. Standing beside the quiet waters of the Rubicon River, he faced a decision that would alter history forever. Crossing that narrow stream with an army was forbidden. It meant rebellion. It meant civil war. It meant gambling everything. His officers waited in silence. The legionaries watched their commander. No one spoke. Then Caesar urged his horse forward. One step, another. The river slipped behind him. There was no turning back. Civil war erupted across the Roman world. Cities declared their allegiance. Families found themselves divided. Former allies met one another across battle lines. Among Caesar's greatest rivals stood Pompey the Great, once his political partner, now the champion of the Senate. Their struggle stretched across continents before ending in decisive victory for Caesar. Pompey fled, only to be murdered in Egypt before Caesar could confront him again. When Caesar returned to Rome, he returned not merely as a victorious general, but as the undisputed master of the Republic. Crowds filled the streets to welcome him. Garlands hung from buildings. Triumphal processions displayed unimaginable wealth seized during years of conquest. Exotic animals marched before cheering spectators. Captured standards testified to distant victories. The city celebrated without restraint, yet inside the Senate house, celebration was mixed with fear. Caesar accepted honors unlike any Roman before him. His image appeared on coins while he still lived. His statue stood beside those of ancient kings. He wore garments once reserved for triumphs. He occupied a gilded chair before the Senate. One title followed another: dictator, commander, father of the fatherland. Finally, dictator for life. Each new honor convinced his supporters that Rome had found its greatest leader. Each new honor convinced his opponents that the Republic was dying. Among those closest to Caesar stood a man few suspected would one day help decide his fate: Marcus Junius Brutus, educated, thoughtful, respected, the son of a family deeply connected to the ideals of the Republic. Caesar trusted him. He promoted him. He forgave him. After the Civil War, many believed Caesar regarded Brutus almost as a son. That trust would become one of history's most tragic vulnerabilities. Another trusted ally watched events unfold from a different perspective: Decimus Brutus, a seasoned military commander, a veteran of Caesar's campaigns. Unlike many politicians, Decimus had earned Caesar's confidence on the battlefield. They had shared victories, hardships, and years of service together. Few men possessed greater access to Caesar's private thoughts. Few betrayals would cut more deeply. Watching all of this with careful eyes was Mark Antony, bold, charismatic, utterly loyal to Caesar. He understood that admiration alone did not protect great men. Power attracted rivals. Success created resentment. Every honor granted to Caesar widened the distance between him and those who believed themselves guardians of the Republic. At first, the conversations remained private: a whispered concern after a Senate meeting, a cautious remark during a dinner, an uneasy joke that lingered too long. Then whispers became discussions. Discussions became secret gatherings. The question no longer asked whether Caesar had become too powerful. The question had changed: what could still be done before Rome crowned a king? And somewhere within those quiet conversations, among men who smiled in public and embraced Caesar as friends, the first outline of a conspiracy quietly took shape. Unseen by the most powerful man in the Roman world, the conspiracy did not begin with daggers. It began with conversations behind the polished marble walls of Rome, beneath painted ceilings where senators spoke of honor and law. Fear slowly transformed into determination. Caesar had defeated every army that stood against him, but these men believed there remained one enemy he could never conquer: the anxiety of those who feared losing the Republic. Every new privilege granted to Caesar became another spark: a golden chair inside the Senate, a bodyguard of loyal veterans, his portrait struck upon Roman coins while he still breathed, the right to wear the purple cloak reserved for triumph. To his supporters, these honors celebrated the greatest Roman of the age. To his enemies, they sounded like the footsteps of a king, and Rome had sworn centuries earlier that it would never again bow before a king. That ancient promise still haunted powerful families. None carried its weight more heavily than Marcus Junius Brutus. His ancestors had become legends after overthrowing Rome's last monarch. Since childhood, Brutus had grown up hearing that story. Freedom was not merely a political idea within his family. It was an inheritance, a duty, a sacred obligation. Yet duty collided with gratitude. Caesar had spared Brutus after the Civil War. He had restored his political career. He had trusted him when others urged caution. Every kindness made Brutus hesitate. Every honor Caesar bestowed upon himself made that hesitation more painful. He lay awake through countless nights, replaying the same question: was loyalty owed to a friend or to the Republic? Others noticed his struggle. One by one, they approached him, not with demands, with whispers. Rome needs you. Only someone Caesar trusts can save the Republic. History will remember your choice. Each conversation ended before anyone spoke too openly. Walls had ears. Servants carried rumors. Even silence could become evidence. Meanwhile, another figure entered the heart of the conspiracy, Decimus Brutus. Unlike Marcus, Decimus was no reluctant philosopher. He understood soldiers, campaigns, logistics. He knew Caesar's habits better than almost anyone alive. He knew when Caesar laughed, when he ignored advice, when he accepted invitations. Most importantly, he knew how difficult it would be to bring Caesar into a trap. That knowledge made him indispensable. Meetings multiplied across Rome. Private villas became gathering places. Gardens hidden behind high walls echoed with cautious voices after sunset. Oil lamps burned late into the night, while names were quietly added to the growing circle. became Eventually, more than 60 senators swore themselves to the plot. Each carried different motives. Some feared tyranny. Some sought lost influence. Some desired revenge. Some simply believed history demanded action. Different ambitions. One decision: Caesar had to die. Yet killing the most powerful man in Rome required perfect timing. Strike too early, his veterans would retaliate. Strike too late, he might accept the crown many believed he secretly desired. Every passing day narrowed their opportunity. Then fate seemed to offer one. The festival of Lupercalia filled Rome with celebration. Crowds lined the streets as Mark Antony, serving as one of the festival's leaders, approached Caesar before thousands of cheering citizens. In his hands rested a royal diadem, a symbol of kingship. The crowd fell silent. Antony lifted it toward Caesar. For a heartbeat, all of Rome seemed to stop breathing. Would he accept it? Caesar looked across the sea of faces. Some hopeful, some fearful. Slowly, he refused. The people erupted into applause. Antony offered it again. Caesar refused again. To many watching, the gesture proved his humility. To others, it proved something entirely different. They believed he had not rejected the crown because he did not want it. They believed he was simply waiting for the perfect moment. The conspiracy accelerated. There was no more time for hesitation. Even Brutus sensed the current pulling him toward an irreversible choice. Then strange reports began spreading through Rome. A respected soothsayer warned Caesar to beware the Ides of March. Most laughed. Rome overflowed with omens. Every week, birds flew in unusual formations. Lightning struck temples. Sacred animals behaved strangely. Such stories rarely changed the plans of powerful men. Caesar dismissed the warning with a smile, but the words lingered in the memories of those around him. Beware the Ides of March, as if fate itself had whispered a date. The conspirators met again. This time, they finalized everything. The location, the signal, the roles each man would play. One difficult question remained. Mark Antony. If Antony stood beside Caesar when the attack began, he would fight with unmatched ferocity. He was younger, stronger, a seasoned commander. His presence alone might ruin the entire operation. Someone would have to separate him from Caesar, not by force, by distraction. The task required precision, no mistakes, no hesitation. Decimus then proposed the final piece of the plan. He would personally ensure Caesar attended the Senate meeting. Some believed Caesar had begun considering cancellation after hearing repeated warnings from friends and family. Decimus smiled calmly. If Caesar hesitates, I will convince him. Those words settled over the gathering like a shadow, because no one possessed greater influence over Caesar's immediate decisions than the man he trusted with campaigns, victories, and years of friendship. The trap was no longer theoretical. It was ready. Outside, Rome continued as though nothing had changed. Merchants filled the forum. Children chased one another through crowded streets. Blacksmiths hammered glowing iron. Priests offered sacrifices inside ancient temples. The city breathed peacefully, completely unaware that beneath its ordinary rhythms, dozens of respected senators had already committed themselves to an act that would shake the ancient world. Only a few days remained. Only a few days remained. Only one meeting remained. Only one final decision separated Julius Caesar from immortality and from 23 waiting blades. The night before the Ides of March felt strangely ordinary. Rome settled beneath a quiet sky. Lanterns flickered along narrow streets. Merchants closed their shops. Voices faded into the darkness. Inside his home, Julius Caesar tried to rest. Sleep never truly came. Instead, uneasy dreams pulled him awake again and again. Across the room, his wife Calpurnia had endured dreams of her own. She had seen blood. She had seen her husband lying lifeless. She had seen Rome mourning. When dawn finally approached, she pleaded with him. "Do not go to the Senate today." It was not politics speaking. It was fear, the kind of fear that arrives without reason and refuses to leave. Caesar listened. For perhaps the first time in years, the unconquered general hesitated. He had ignored countless omens before, but Calpurnia's terror was unmistakable. He considered remaining home. Outside, servants prepared to inform the Senate that the meeting would be postponed. For a brief moment, history balanced on the edge of a single decision. Then Decimus Brutus arrived. He entered not as a conspirator, but as a trusted friend. He found Caesar uncertain, exactly as the conspirators had feared. Decimus did not argue with passion. He argued with pride. "If you stay home because of dreams," he said quietly, "what will the Senate think?" He reminded Caesar that senators had gathered from across Rome, that many important matters awaited his judgment, that postponing the meeting would make him appear weak. Then he delivered the final push. "The people will say you fear your own shadow." Those words struck deeper than any prophecy. Caesar had spent his life defeating fear. He would not allow whispers of cowardice to stain his legacy. Slowly, he stood. Calpurnia watched in helpless silence. The decision had been made. As Caesar's litter carried him toward the theater of Pompey, the streets grew crowded. Citizens greeted him. Veterans saluted him. Some stretched out their hands simply to touch the passing procession. Few realized they were witnessing the final journey of Rome's greatest commander. Among the crowd, one man pushed desperately forward. He carried a folded document. Inside it were the names of the conspirators. A complete warning. He managed to reach Caesar. "My lord, read this immediately. It concerns your safety." Caesar accepted the scroll without opening it. Other petitions followed. More documents, more requests. The warning disappeared into the pile, clutched in his hand. He never read it. At the Senate chamber, the conspirators were already waiting. Each greeted Caesar warmly. Each smiled. Each bowed with perfect courtesy. Nothing betrayed what lay hidden beneath their robes. Steel, sharp, silent, deadly. Brutus stood among them. His face remained calm. Only his heartbeat betrayed him. He remembered every kindness Caesar had shown him, every opportunity, every act of forgiveness. For one final moment he questioned everything. Was there still another way? Then Cassius caught his eye. A small nod. No words, only commitment. There would be no turning back. Outside the chamber, Mark Antony approached. He intended to enter beside Caesar as always. Before he reached the doors, one of the conspirators intercepted him. A friendly conversation, a political question, nothing unusual. Antony paused politely, exactly as they had planned. Those few stolen moments were all the assassins needed. Inside the Senate, Caesar took his seat. The meeting had barely begun when a senator named Julius Caesar stepped forward. He carried a petition requesting mercy for his exiled brother. Caesar had already rejected it. Now Caesar pleaded once more. Caesar declined again. Caesar suddenly seized Caesar's toga. The gesture shocked everyone. It violated every custom of respect. Caesar rose in anger. "What is the meaning of this?" Before anyone answered, a blade flashed. Publius Servilius Casca struck first. The attack was hurried. The wound was shallow. Caesar instinctively grabbed Casca's arm and fought back. "What are you doing?" For one heartbeat, chaos froze. Then everything exploded. Another senator lunged, then another. Steel appeared from every direction. The chamber erupted into violence. Caesar spun desperately, trying to defend himself. He had survived countless battlefields. Yet here he carried no sword, no armor, no loyal legion. Only men he believed were colleagues, only friends. Everywhere he turned, another blade, another face, another betrayal. He recognized them. Cassius, Casca. Cinna, Servilius, men who had smiled only moments before. Others missed in the confusion, wounding fellow conspirators instead. Blood splashed across white marble. Shouts echoed beneath the towering columns. Senators fled in panic. Some hid beneath benches. Others raced toward the exits. Rome's highest council had become a battlefield. Then Caesar saw him, Marcus Junius Brutus, standing only a few steps away, holding a dagger. For an instant neither man moved. Time itself seemed suspended. Caesar searched Brutus's face, not for hatred, for doubt. He found both. Brutus hesitated. His hand trembled. Everything he believed, everything he owed, everything he feared. Then Brutus stepped forward and drove his blade into the man who had trusted him above so many others. The room fell silent inside Caesar's mind. He no longer struggled, no longer resisted. The betrayal had wounded him more deeply than any knife ever could. Surrounded by the men he had called allies, Julius Caesar collapsed beneath the statue of Pompey, the very rival he had defeated years before. One by one, the blades stopped moving. 23 wounds marked the body of the most powerful man in the Roman world. The conspirators looked at one another, breathing hard, hands stained with blood. Certain they had saved the Republic. Certain Rome would hail them as liberators. They were wrong. Outside the Senate chamber, word of the assassination was already spreading through the streets. And among the first to hear it was Mark Antony. His reaction would transform a political murder into a civil war that would consume the Roman world. Mark Antony did not rush into the Senate chamber. He stopped, just long enough to understand what had happened. The shouting, the footsteps, the terrified senators pouring into the streets. None of it mattered as much as a single truth. None of it mattered as much as a single truth. Julius Caesar was dead, and the men who had killed him were still inside. Antony knew courage and recklessness were not the same. He removed the symbols of his office, wrapped himself in an ordinary cloak, and disappeared into the growing confusion before anyone could recognize him. It was not fear that guided his steps. It was patience. That Caesar could no longer command an army, but Antony still could. And revenge required time. Inside the Senate, the conspirators stood around Caesar's body. For several long moments, no one spoke. The silence they had imagined would be filled with applause instead echoed with uncertainty. Cassius finally broke it. "It is finished." Brutus looked down at the fallen dictator. Blood spread slowly across the polished marble floor, pooling beneath the statue of Pompey. Caesar's old rival. The irony struck everyone. The conqueror of Pompeii had died beneath Pompey's gaze. Yet victory did not feel like victory, not even to the men holding the daggers. The conspirators stepped into the streets expecting celebration. Instead, they found something else. Doors closing. Merchants abandoning their stalls. Citizens retreating into their homes. Mothers pulling children indoors. No cheers, no cries of liberation, only fear. Rome had witnessed political violence before. Its people understood what always followed. More violence. Brutus raised his hands and attempted to speak. Romans, we have removed a tyrant. The Republic is free. The words drifted across the forum. Few answered. Most simply watched. Some recognized Brutus as an honorable man. Others saw only a senator standing with blood still staining his clothes. Freedom was difficult to celebrate while the body of Rome's greatest general remained unburied. Across the city, Caesar's veterans reacted with disbelief. Many had marched beside him for nearly a decade. They had crossed frozen rivers together, built camps together, buried friends together. To them, he was the commander who had shared their hunger and danger. When word spread that senators had murdered him inside the Senate itself, grief quickly hardened into anger. The conspirators had expected the army to remain quiet. They misunderstood the loyalty Caesar had inspired. That evening, Antony met secretly with Caesar's closest supporters. No grand speeches, no emotional outbursts, only cold calculation. He understood something Brutus did not. Winning the first moment meant nothing. Winning the people meant everything. If Rome could be convinced that Caesar died a martyr rather than a tyrant, the assassins would lose everything they believed they had gained. The next move had already begun. The conspirators, meanwhile, argued among themselves. Cassius demanded immediate action. Seize the treasury, secure the soldiers, arrest Antony. Every hour strengthened their enemies. Brutus refused. We are not butchers. He insisted that Rome must see justice, not revenge. No executions. No lists of enemies. No further bloodshed. Cassius stared at him in disbelief. They had just killed the most powerful man in the Republic, yet Brutus still believed the Republic's old rules could survive. History would soon prove otherwise. A fragile compromise emerged. The Senate declared that Caesar's assassination would not be punished. At the same time, every law Caesar had passed would remain valid. Neither side truly accepted the agreement. Both merely needed time to gather allies, time to prepare, time to decide who would rule Rome. Then came the funeral. The conspirators believed it would calm the city. Instead, it ignited it. Thousands filled the forum. Veterans stood shoulder to shoulder with ordinary citizens. The atmosphere was heavy. No one knew what Antony intended to say. Brutus had spoken with reason. Would Antony speak with restraint? He stepped forward slowly. He did not begin with anger. He began with praise. He spoke of Caesar's victories, his generosity, his refusal of the royal crown before the people. He reminded the crowd that Caesar had enriched Rome, expanded its power, and rewarded its soldiers. Then Antony paused. His voice grew quieter. He lifted Caesar's blood-stained toga before the crowd. One tear in the cloth, then another. He pointed to each wound. This was made by Cassius, this by Casca, and here is the place where Brutus struck. The crowd fell silent. Then Antony spoke the words that shattered the conspirators' hopes. This was the most unkind cut of all, because Brutus had been Caesar's friend, his trusted companion. His betrayal wounded deeper than every other blade. The forum erupted. Grief became fury. Fury became rage. Men shouted. Women wept openly. Veterans raised their fists toward the Capitol. The funeral pyre became an explosion of emotion. People seized burning wood from the flames and rushed into the streets. The city was no longer mourning, it was hunting. The conspirators fled for their lives. Brutus and Cassius escaped Rome under cover of darkness, suddenly transformed from self-proclaimed liberators into fugitives. Behind them, the republic they had hoped to save was collapsing faster than ever. Antony watched the chaos unfold. He understood that Caesar's death had not restored the old republic. It had destroyed it, and from its ashes, a struggle for absolute power was only beginning. Far from Rome, another young man was already reading Caesar's will. His name was Gaius Octavius. Few citizens knew him. Few senators feared him. But within that document lay one astonishing revelation. Caesar had adopted Octavius as his legal son and principal heir. The quiet young heir had just inherited not only Caesar's fortune, but also his name, his loyal veterans, and, unknowingly, the future of Rome itself. The assassination had ended one man's life. It had also opened the door for a new contender, one who would prove even more patient, even more calculating, and ultimately, far more powerful than Julius Caesar himself. Rome believed Julius Caesar's death would restore the Republic. Instead, it unleashed a struggle unlike anything the city had ever witnessed. The conspirators had removed one man, but they had not removed his legacy. In death, Caesar became more powerful than many had feared he would ever become in life. Far from the noise of the Forum, a quiet 18-year-old received news that would alter history forever. Gaius Octavius, reserved, intelligent, patient. Few senators considered him dangerous. He possessed no famous victories, no celebrated command, no legendary reputation. Yet Caesar had seen something others had missed. In his will, the murdered dictator adopted Octavius as his son and heir. With a single document, the young man inherited not only Caesar's wealth, but also his name. From that moment forward, he became Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus Octavian. The name alone carried enormous power. Thousands of veterans who had once marched behind Julius Caesar suddenly looked toward his adopted son, not because he inspired them immediately, but because the name Caesar had become a banner all its own. Mark Antony underestimated him. To Antony, Octavian was little more than an inexperienced youth stepping into a world ruled by seasoned politicians and battle-hardened generals. He expected gratitude, obedience, perhaps even submission. Instead, he found a rival, quiet, measured, always watching, always calculating. Octavian rarely raised his voice. He simply waited for others to make mistakes, and Antony made many. Meanwhile, Brutus and Cassius gathered armies in the eastern provinces. They still believed they had acted for Rome, still believed history would eventually understand them. But ideals alone could no longer command the Republic. Armies would decide its future. The assassins who once held daggers now carried the burden of defending their actions with swords. For a brief moment, old enemies became uneasy allies. Antony, Octavian, and Marcus Aemilius Lepidus formed the second triumvirate. Unlike earlier political alliances, this one possessed extraordinary legal authority. Its first act was not reconciliation, it was revenge. Lists were drawn, names were written, enemies of the new regime were marked for death, properties confiscated, families destroyed. The Republic's legal traditions collapsed beneath the weight of political survival. Thousands died in the proscriptions. Among them was the great orator Cicero, whose voice had once echoed through the Senate in defense of republican ideals. His death shocked Rome. The message was unmistakable. Mercy had become a luxury. no leader could afford. The final reckoning came in 42 BC on the plains near Philippi. Brutus and Cassius stood together one last time. Across the battlefield waited the combined forces of Antony and Octavian. The men who had killed Caesar now faced the men who claimed to avenge him. The battle raged across the Macedonian countryside. Roman fought Roman, veteran fought veteran. Friends found themselves on opposite sides of the same civil war. When the dust settled, Cassius believed all was lost. Misled by incomplete reports, he chose death by his own sword. Days later, Brutus fought on alone. His army shattered, his hopes gone. Refusing capture, he ended his own life. Ancient writers tell us that Antony looked upon Brutus with genuine respect. Whatever else Brutus had been, he had acted according to his convictions, but conviction had not saved the Republic. With Brutus gone, only two giants remained, Antony and Octavian. Their alliance slowly dissolved into suspicion. Suspicion became rivalry. Rivalry became open conflict. Antony found both love and political partnership with Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt. To many Romans, Octavian portrayed this relationship as proof that Antony had abandoned Rome for a foreign throne. It was brilliant propaganda. The struggle was no longer presented as a civil war. It became a fight to save Rome itself. In 31 BC, their destinies met at the Battle of Actium. The sea churned with hundreds of warships. Commands echoed across the water. Smoke covered the horizon. When the battle ended, Antony and Cleopatra fled to Egypt. Within a year, both were dead. Octavian stood alone. No rivals remained. No armies challenged him. No senator possessed enough influence to resist. Rome had sought to prevent one man from becoming supreme. Instead, years of civil war had delivered exactly that. Octavian understood a lesson Caesar never had the chance to fully master. Power did not need to announce itself. It needed to appear reluctant. He rejected the title of king. He preserved the outward forms of the Republic. The Senate continued to meet. Magistrates continued to serve. Ancient traditions remained visible, yet everyone understood where real authority now rested. In 27 BC, the Senate granted him a new title, Augustus, the revered one, the first Roman emperor. The Republic had not survived Caesar's assassination. It had quietly transformed into an empire. Looking back across history, the irony is impossible to ignore. The conspirators believed 23 blades would save Roman liberty. Instead, those blades accelerated its end. By removing Julius Caesar, they removed the last figure capable of controlling the political storm he had unleashed. The vacuum he left behind became a battlefield that consumed an entire generation. And Caesar himself? His body fell beneath the statue of Pompey on the Ides of March. But his name never truly died. It became a title, a symbol, a legacy carried by emperors for centuries. From the Roman Caesar came the German Kaiser. From Caesar also came the Russian Tsar, long after the marble Senate house crumbled into ruins, long after the Republic faded into memory. His name continued to define supreme power across continents. So perhaps the greatest surprise of all is this. The men who believed they were ending Caesar's story actually ensured it would never end. They silenced his voice, but they amplified his legend. They ended his life, but they reshaped the destiny of the Western world. And every empire that followed would, in one way or another, walk through the shadow cast on that single day. The Ides of March, when friendship yielded to fear, when ambition met betrayal, when 23 blades changed history forever, and when the Roman Republic began its final, irreversible journey toward becoming the greatest empire of the ancient world.